Since Pedro and Virginia said almost everything about it, I thought it would be too much repetition, so I will jump with different things meanwhile I'm going through the slides. So I will not follow them exactly, otherwise it's going to be no?
Oh, maybe. Now.
Okay, so this is how TMS EG came out. So there was a TMS, there was EG, and they put them together. The thing is that the problem about TMS EG is that they consider TMS EG as it was an EP. So the idea is that we give a TMS stimulation, and with EG we just got a response like as it was in EP, but without considering all the confounds and all the other things that can be inside. Another thing I always want to stress is that when you combine two techniques, you always have to keep in mind that every technique you are using is a filter. So every technique per se has a bias. TMS cannot stimulate all the neurons. Only some neurons are activated by TMS. EG cannot show the activity of all the neurons. Only some neurons can be seen with EG. And if you put them together, it's an intersection. So a part of the neurons that are activated with TMS activate, and only a part of those that are activated we can see with EG. So always when you design a protocol, always think about it, about the biology behind it. It's not that it's just TMS and EG. It's more than that. In this line, since they have been mentioned many times today, I want to say that there are three ways of doing TMS-EG, even though they are implicit, they are not explicit, but in three ways TMS-EG has been used so far. One way is for the people focused on the motor cortex, you have the threshold defined by the motor output, and you know where to stimulate, what is the current direction, what is the position, again, thanks to the motor output. The second approach that has been used so far is somehow structural or fMRI guided TMS, where you have no idea of the direction of the coil. Usually the stimulation intensity is defined by the motor cortex, which is wrong, because every brain region has different excitability levels, and we always use the motor cortex, which is actually the strangest cortical region, because it's a granular region, etc., etc. So the thing that we should know is to find a way to stimulate, and with the structural and fMRI guided TMS, we don't know direction, we don't know the intensity and the exact position, because even the position might change depending on how we move the coil with respect to the cortex. It doesn't mean that the area that is blobbing with fMRI is actually the best for TMS stimulation. And then there is the third method, which is the EG-guided TMS-EG. And this is the Milano group using, where they go with the TMS coil, and they find the area in the region of interest. They find the position which responds the best with EG. They find the position of the coil, they find the current direction, and the intensity based on EG. The problem of this method, so this method is super cool for some studies. For example, sleep and wakefulness and sleep showed completely different connectivity. You can see it's really completely different. And there is no this typical 45, 60, and 100p, 180. It's a completely different pattern. And then what they also have shown is that stimulating the different brain areas, you get with TMS the maximal response in the frequency that is the natural frequency of that area, so which is super cool. And as you can see, the responses are huge compared to the ones that we usually see in TMS-EG field. So the responses, I've tried to play with their method, and you can get up to 30 microvolts, which is huge, but it's somehow understandable because we are injecting a huge amount of electric field in the brain, co-activating a huge amount of neurons altogether. So it's somehow, you can expect having this high responses compared to the standard sensory input, which cannot go more than 5 microvolts, I would say. This is why I also like your figure, because your N15 was, or P15 was much higher than the standard TMS-EG data. There is a problem here, I will show it later, and it's linked to what we were talking about before. So TMS-EG related confounds, what we know is that we have the pulse artifact in the first 5 milliseconds, and a decay artifact, sometimes not. Then we have a muscular twitch in almost all the standard motor cortex stimulation or DLPFC standard stimulation. Still decay artifact if you're not good in preparing the channels. Then we have between 20 and 80 milliseconds, there is a bit of mixture of everything. And the late are usually the PP or peripheral evoked potential are prevalent, because here we have the auditory response, which is huge. This is why the Milano method cannot be used in all the protocols, because Milano method, to find the hotspot and the intensity, you need to have an immediate response of the EEG in the first milliseconds, and you cannot have it if you have the muscular twitch. And this paper from Thomas showed that actually only some regions of the head can be stimulated without having a muscular twitch. So all the red ones should be avoided. And positioning the coil on C3, you usually have also the muscular twitch. This is why the motor cortex is not always, is actually almost never optimal for their method. But their studies, they are mainly focused in the central region, because they are focused on the connectivity between different levels of consciousness. So they don't care about this, which is also why a good way to avoid problems is to have a design that avoids problems. And here to clean this, usually it's independent component analysis is used, but there is a problem. As already Thomas said, this is the other option, I put it, so just, but the independent component analysis is a problem because when you have a component that has a huge contribution in the signal, all the signal that has the same proportion will be captured. So what it means, that if I have a muscular twitch that has in time a certain behavior, all the signal that is linearly proportional to that behavior will be captured also from the genuine regions. And since this one is much higher, it will take everything in. So what you get at the end, you will have a signal that is clean apart from everything is proportional to the muscular twitch. Since you have usually more than one, actually what you take out is a huge signal from the real cortex. This is I was just showing how the auditory evoked potential comes out also very early, but it's very little. And then we have this N100P 180, which is dominant and is central. And this is why when you see in the N100 analysis, when you see this is usually evoked auditory evoked potential. And the same, this is just, I took an example of a somatosensory evoked potential just to because in this case, nobody can say that the data have been cleaned wrongly because it's stimulated in the periphery. And then at 20 milliseconds, you have the response in the cortex of the sensory evoked potential, but you can see that at N100, which is 120 milliseconds more or less, you have again the same distribution on the scalp of a typical peripheral unspecific response. So if you see this, usually it's not transcranial evoked potential. Maybe it is, but in a amount that we don't know. So this is one study that has done TMS on different brain regions. And as you can see, N100 has always the same distribution, which shows an unspecificity of the component itself. I'm stressing about this for two reasons. One is that don't believe to all the studies that are picking components. And when the signal is located in the middle, in the central region. And there are plenty of studies about N100 so far. They should be taken with a lot of caution because we don't know what the things are changing. It's science, and now we know this signal is much less reliable. The second thing is that usually when we analyze the data with peaks, but this is also very dangerous, and I'll say why. So when you have a curve with a peak, then you take the peak and then you do statistical analysis. And then when you compare, if you do it on all the channels, the problem is that many people do not do it on all channels. They take it only on the peak of, let's say, global mean free power or one channel or a group of channels. But what can happen is that your statistical difference is actually not guided by the source that makes the peak. I don't know if I can draw.
Yeah.
So because I don't know if it's clear. So if you have a peak, let's say like this, and you have another activity that does like this, you will have your distribution guided by this one. But your statistical analysis maybe is guided by this source here, because usually the statistical analysis is much smaller than the amount of the peak you are looking at. And then I have seen papers when they show then the statistical difference on channels here. But these channels do not belong to this source. They are guided by another source. So when you choose a peak, you are misleading your results. You might misinterpret them. So I always prefer to do the statistical analysis point by point. I know there is a problem of multiple comparison. But if we don't do that, we don't know where the source of difference is coming from. I don't know whether this is clear or not. I'm just saying my experience. You don't have to follow anything of what I'm saying. I'm just saying that what is my experience with the TMS-EG data. So this was the first sham paper, and they did a shoulder stimulation. It was actually smart because there are much less problems with the shoulder stimulation than with any of the things we were talking about before. You see the data are beautiful, and that there is almost no artifact. But the shoulder stimulation has limitations. I will go through it. You have seen this. This is first paper from Gordon. I was just here putting different sham studies that have been done, but we don't have to go through all of them. This has been already shown. This has already been shown. This is about TAC, where they show that actually the evoked response, the auditory evoked response can be cleaned out. In this study from Rocky, they also were able to clean the auditory evoked response here. They did also analysis of the peripheral evoked potential, but the problem here is that was monosensory, so there was not a combination with the auditory stimulation, so it cannot really be compared. There is also a problem, they used ICA here, which is a big problem. This is a study that has been mentioned, I think, by Agnese about the fact that if you, not exactly this study, but the effect of the auditory input to the excitability, peripheral excitability. So they have shown actually that with the white noise, the excitability goes up. And it's true that the white noise in time is always the same, but the feeling of the subject changes. So in a long experiment where you have white noise for a long time, the brain state changes. So if you want to compare the effects of a stimulation over time, there is a bias there. This is how we are trying to find other ways to do to do real sham, where we put bigger electrodes to have less the feeling of focality. And we use this sham coil that delivers the pulse only on one side, but not on the other. So if you reverse it, it doesn't deliver any pulse, but the sound is the same. So it actually delivers the pulse towards the experimenter or towards the computer, towards the robot, if you this is a method that I'm trying to implement for cleaning the decay artifact. So what we did in our sham study is that we if you want to do electrical stimulation of the cranial on the skin of on the head, then I always suggest to have reversed stimulation polarity, because the assumption is that the cortical activation is going to be the same, but the artifact is going to be opposite. So then we can use the artifact information when we use when I use the subtraction through fitting, and to see whether I'm introducing a bias by fitting, because also by fitting you might introduce a signal that is not there. But since I have the same stimulation reversed, I know that I'm not introducing a bias here. I also wanted to show that this, for example, this component, I do it on ICA because it reduces the complexity of the signal when I do the fitting, and then I take all the components back. I don't discard any component. And I wanted also to show that this component, for example, it's a component that can perfectly be a cortical response. But if I take out all the components that have a decay artifact, I should take it out, also this one, unless I don't interpolate for a long time. This is what I got. And the most disappointing thing was that I actually, there is a vibration here of the coil. This coil, the sham coil, vibrates a lot, and I couldn't control for that, so there is a vibration here. There is some cortical activity that comes around 40, 45. This is one subject, it's not an average. And then there is a huge difference between the sham and the real TMS. I think you got the muscular twitch also with the sham, no, Pedro?
Yes, because of the electrical simulation here, they twitched, making it.
Yeah.
But 33 milliseconds. Oh my God.
This was 100. This is with this coil 120 motor threshold.
How do you deal with this?
I don't.
You interpolate everything.
I leave it there. This was a study of just about the difference between the sham stimulation and the TMS, real TMS EG. This is on the motor cortex. This is one subject that had it more than others. It was a more didactical picture.
Okay,
yeah.
But aren't you afraid to see this in other subjects? How are you going to deal with this?
I'm not going to clean it. It's just about sham. The fact. So my final goal was to show the electric field.
Okay.
So if you use 2 channels, or how many channels you use, this is an electric field on the skin, and this is the electric field of the TMS. So the goal was to say there is no realistic sham, unless you can reproduce this thing here with electric stimulation. The amount of fibers, the amount of fibers and the quality of stimulation of the fibers in the head are going to be always different, whatever you do. And this is the intensity differences and the area differences. So this is a little bit about the shoulder stimulation and the sensory audio stimulation. Yeah, it's more, the result is that there is no real sham, there is no realistic sham. We can, so far, it's very difficult to replicate it. So my take-home message would be more to go, considering everything I said. So we have first responses that are huge and reliable. Actually, you can have a TP with 20 trials, very clear, super clean MEP, TP with 20 trials if you don't have the muscular twitch. So this is the thing. And so the first responses are the most reliable. In 50, 60, 70 milliseconds in the brain happens a lot of things. If I do my standard peripheral nerve stimulation, I have the S1 activation only at N20. Afterwards, it's a mixture of motor cortex, sensory secondary cortex, etc., supplementary motor area. It's a mixture of everything. So if we want to be really reliable and go to see what happens under the coil, it's only going very, very in the first milliseconds. Afterwards, it's a complex interaction of different brain regions and of different inputs.
So you mean less than 20 milliseconds?
No, the 20 milliseconds is a peripheral nerve stimulation. I would say for the brain, we can go further just because we are activating a huge amount of neurons at the same time in the same region. So we don't know how far we can go. But from the studies from the Milano group, I would say that they see something very strong until 30, 40 milliseconds under the coil. And it seems to be a kind of oscillating pattern where they have a positive, negative, positive peak. And afterwards is a mixture. So my goal would be not so much to go, for example, to invent a new sham, because also, as Gordon said, it's never going to happen.
There is no real sham.
Yeah, there's no real sham. But yeah, I wrote it. But the goal for me would be to go as close as possible to the stimulation time point. This is why I also hope that Thomas will develop something super cool very soon. And then to have the same, as you, Martin said, to have the same input-output curve of the MEP on the motor cortex, to have a clear effect of motor contraction, for example, in some of these first responses, because many of these studies don't have an effect of motor contraction. So a motor contraction has a huge effect on the MEP, but not on TEP. So there is a problem. But if we can go close enough to the time of stimulation, I guess something better will be visible.
But then would this be applicable to effective connectivity studies? Or would you only be able to do effective connectivity if you are keeping two central areas?
No, I hope that we will be able to clean the artifact at some point. There will be a mixture because also the muscular twitch of the head introduces sensory input to the brain. The thing is that if we know what is the first response, then we can find a correlation connectivity or something. We have something to start with. If we don't even have a start, it's just we are blind. This is
Sure, but if you're saying that after a while, you know, like effective connectivity is based on tracking the TEP time and then evaluating the active sources that are, you know, along the TEP different components.
yeah.
But if the different components that are later on can then just be attributed to whatever, then can we actually do effective connectivity studies unless you do the Milano way, where it's just the central areas and nothing else?
No, I think so. About effective connectivity, it's a big question in general in EEG. So there are huge studies about the general in EEG and effective connectivity. I don't want to go there. The thing is that for me to start using TMS EEG in a proper way, we have to go to the first components, and then we have to clean this muscular twitch somehow. Whether it's going to be software or having a super cool new protocol, I don't know. The thing is that many of the studies have in the past have somehow put it's a pathway that has been defined, but it didn't lead to what we wanted or to what we would like to. So maybe that pathway is wrong. Maybe we should think about TMS EEG in a completely different way that nobody has actually thought about. But I think that there is a potential. We just have to do it in a different way, because clearly it's not as powerful as it could be.
And then I was just thinking, of course, there is no real shunt. There is no realistic shunt that is going to be one-to-one matching real TMS sensation. but isn't it better to have at least some approximation of this multisensory component rather than nothing?
No, I'm not against using sham, definitely not. I just say we cannot take sham as, take it and use it as it was real.
Yeah.
I'm generally, and I agree with Pedro about this, is I'm generally against subtraction methods in EEG. Because every time you use a subtraction method, you're introducing a bias due to the fact that you are not subtracting something completely reliable. And this happens also for the double pulse TMS EEG, where they use subtraction with sham subtraction. When we, I don't know if you remember when we did the first time the sham study, everyone told us, why don't you subtract it? And I was the one against it. I didn't want to do that because our sham is not, it was better than before, but it's not realistic. So I'm subtracting the effect of the sensory input and also the lack of good fit of the sensory input. So I'm adding the noise to my data. And this is why.
But for instance, say you have a pharmaco-TMS experiment and you are doing a sham that is at least as closely as possible resembling TMS. And you have a sensory evoked potential, you have an auditory evoked potential, which in the end is going to be the multisensory somato-auditory potential.
Yeah.
And then after the drugs, both sham and active change in whatever component, say N100, then you can at least infer that part of that change is of a multisensory nature, right?
The thing is, yes.
It's just it will depend on your design, basically, and what you're after.
My answer is yes, but I would never compare them directly. So I would not do statistics between TMS and the sham,
But
and I would not do the subtraction.
What I mean is more like it would be a good control.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not against
to see, right? Like even if it's just visually, you don't have to do a statistical comparison. But if visually something in sham is changing, then you can infer that you cannot just say the change in the TEP is due to cortical activation. Right? So it's still a control to have.
It's absolutely
depending on your design.
We just don't have to go too far with it. It's a control condition, definitely, but not a reliable.
I mean, it's never going to be exactly the same. Yeah.
So this is what I was saying about the sham, that it can confound the data, but we already said so. And thank you.